The village of Harrington, on the Wold, was one of those perfectly respectable little corners of England that seemed impervious to the troubles of the wider world. Its narrow streets were lined with ivy-clad cottages, their neat gardens brimming with holly and rose bushes. In the centre of the village stood the old church, its grey stone walls softened by centuries of moss, while the chimes of the clock tower marked the passage of time with gentle precision. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, or thought they did, and where the most scandalous event might be a missing hen or a late delivery of the Sunday newspaper. On a crisp December morning, a faint frost lay across the cobblestones, and the air smelled faintly of chimney smoke and pine. In this serene village, a small crowd had begun to gather outside Lady Bantry's old bookshop, a quaint establishment that had stood for over 50 years at the corner of Ivy Lane. The shop's windows, frosted with the breath of winter, displayed an eclectic assortment of volumes, leather, bound tomes, well-thumbed novels, and a curious selection of rare first editions. A handwritten sign in the window read, "Closing for the season's special sale today." It was Miss Jane Marple who noticed the first stirrings of unrest that morning. Having arrived in Harrington, on the Wold for a quiet holiday with her friend, Lady Bantry, she had intended only to enjoy the peace of the village and the comfort of Lady Bantry's warm drawing-room. Yet Miss Marple's keen eyes, ever observant, could not ignore the cluster of villagers murmuring anxiously outside the shop. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the lane, her small, trim figure wrapped in a dark coat, and her usual grey hat perched neatly on her head. She took in the scene with the air of someone evaluating a delicate puzzle. "Good morning, Miss Marple," called a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Penelope Cartwright, the vicar's wife, whose enthusiasm for gossip was rivalled only by her devotion to the parish. "Have you heard there's been an accident at Lady Bantry's?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "An accident, Mrs. Cartwright? I hope it is nothing serious." "Oh, I do hope so too, but it seems. Well, the shopkeeper, Mr. Henry Winthrop, has been found, quite suddenly ill. Some say it was an unfortunate fall, others whisper of something more sinister. Mrs. Cartwright's eyes widened dramatically. They found him behind the counter, and there was, oh heavens, a peculiar smell of almonds in the air. Miss Marple's lips twitched. She had long been familiar with the faint, almost imperceptible scent that often accompanied cyanide poisoning, a detail she would remember for later reflection. "How distressing," she murmured, her voice mild yet tinged with curiosity. "I shall have to pay a visit. Thank you, Mrs. Cartwright." As Miss Marple approached the bookshop, she noted the small crowd that had gathered. Villagers whispered among themselves, their breath-puffing clouds of fog into the frosty air. There was Mr. Philip Hargreaves, a solicitor known for his meticulous nature, Miss Emily Linton, the librarian with a penchant for detective novels, Captain Roger Belgrave, recently returned from the colonies and prone to dramatic declarations, and Mrs. Agatha Perkins, whose curiosity seemed to exceed that of any other villager. All faces were marked with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Through the shop window, Miss Marple could see Lady Bantry herself, standing near the counter, her normally composed expression tinged with worry. Lady Bantry was a woman of refined bearing, with silver hair pulled into a neat chignon and eyes that could detect a fib at 50 paces. She was speaking quietly with Mr. Winthrop, who was seated heavily in a chair, his face pale, yet his eyes sharp and alert. "Henry, are you quite sure you're all right?" Lady Bantry's voice was gentle but insistent. I believe so, my lady," Winthrop replied, his tone weak yet steady. "It seems I simply tripped over a loose rug, nothing more." Miss Marple entered the shop quietly, her presence barely noticed at first amid the murmurs. She took in the room with a practised eye. The shop smelled of musty paper and ink, a comforting aroma to some, but now carrying a hint of something more acrid, something faintly chemical. Rows of shelves stood like sentinels, laden with books of every shape and size. A brass cash register gleamed near the counter, and behind it lay a small writing desk, cluttered with papers and ledgers. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Lady Bantry said warmly, yet there was a tension in her voice. "I feared you would be alarmed to see such a scene." "Not at all," Miss Marple replied smoothly. "I am always interested in the workings of an old bookshop, and accidents, regrettable as they may be, often reveal far more than they intend." Her gaze lingered on the rug at Mr. Winthrop's feet, noting its slight curl at the edges. "Indeed," Winthrop said faintly, "it is merely an unfortunate tumble. I assure you, nothing more." Miss Marple inclined her head politely, though her mind was already at work. There were small inconsistencies that prickled her instinct, the peculiar smell in the air, the crowd's sudden agitation, and the subtle tension between some of the villagers who exchanged uneasy glances. She would need to observe carefully before drawing any conclusions. "Now let us have some tea, shall we?" Lady Bantry suggested, leading Miss Marple to a small side room furnished with a polished oak table and a collection of delicate china. The aroma of freshly brewed tea and warm scones eased some of the morning's tension. As they sipped their tea, Miss Marple allowed her thoughts to wander. She reflected on the nature of the village, tight, knit, seemingly tranquil, yet no community was immune to secrets. Henry Winthrop was respected, perhaps even liked, but everyone had their private irritations and hidden motives. The question, as always, was which of these ordinary grievances could escalate into something more dangerous. The morning wore on, and more villagers arrived under the guise of polite concern. Miss Marple greeted them all quietly, asking indirect questions and noting reactions. She listened as Captain Belgrave recounted his travels abroad, and Miss Linton nervously discussed the recent shipment of rare books. Mr. Hargreaves observed everything with the eye of a professional man of law, and Mrs. Perkins, as expected, could not resist offering her own conjectures. Miss Marple found herself reflecting on the subtle tension among them. Why did Captain Belgrave avoid looking directly at Mr. Winthrop? Why did Miss Linton fidget with a pair of gloves she had not worn? And why did Mr. Hargreaves, normally composed, seem almost eager for some confirmation of gossip? Just as the morning sunlight began to filter through the frosted windows, there came a sudden, startling sound, a faint crash from the back of the shop, followed by a sharp exclamation. Miss Marple rose immediately, her sharp eyes narrowing. She was aware, as she had learned in a long life of observing human nature, that such noises often marked the turning point of ordinary days into extraordinary ones. She found the source quickly. A small stack of books had toppled from a shelf in the rear of the shop. But it was the figure standing beside them that drew her attention. A new visitor, unfamiliar to the village, whose startled expression and dishevelled coat suggested that this day's events were only beginning. Miss Marple's mind worked quietly but swiftly. She had seen the first pieces of the puzzle, and the pattern was already beginning to form. This was not a mere accident. The faint scent of almonds lingered. The villagers' glances were loaded with unspoken meanings, and Henry Winthrop, though outwardly calm, bore the faint tension of someone concealing more than he revealed. As the village clock chimed the hour, Miss Marple sipped her tea with the serene composure that had become her trademark. She knew instinctively that the coming days in Harrington on the Wold would be filled with intrigue, subtle observations, and revelations that only the most patient and perceptive could uncover. And she, Miss Jane Marple, was already prepared to watch, listen, and untangle the threads of mystery that had begun to weave themselves in Lady Bantry's old bookshop. The morning's excitement had settled into a tense stillness in Lady Bantry's old bookshop, yet Miss Marple's sharp eyes never rested. She had learned long ago that in a small village the most innocuous events could conceal the most remarkable secrets. The fallen books, the faint scent of almonds, the villagers' furtive glances, they were all threads in a tapestry that only careful observation could unravel. Lady Bantry, ever the gracious hostess, insisted that Miss Marple accompany her on a quiet tour of the shop, ostensibly to survey the inventory, but, Miss Marple knew, also to keep her occupied while the others gathered their composure. Yet, even in this seemingly mundane activity, Miss Marple's mind worked swiftly. She examined each shelf, noting the condition of the books, the subtle dust patterns, and the faint indentation marks on certain titles, signs of frequent handling, perhaps by more than one person. "Henry, did you notice anything unusual this morning before your fall?" Miss Marple asked gently, keeping her tone conversational. Winthrop shook his head. "No, Miss Marple, nothing at all. It was a simple accident, a rug, a misstep, and that is all." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a polite, thoughtful smile. "Sometimes accidents are more revealing than appearances suggest. Don't you agree?" she remarked. She did not wait for a response, moving on to inspect a corner where a small table displayed rare editions. The leather bindings were cracked from age, yet one particular volume, a first edition of the Mysteries of Udolpho, showed signs of recent handling. Meanwhile, the other villagers had resumed their low murmurings, clustered near the counter. Captain Roger Belgrave, his coat slightly rumpled from the morning's bustle, leaned against the shelves with an air of restless energy. Miss Emily Linton, adjusting her spectacles, seemed preoccupied with the careful arrangement of books rather than the incident itself. Mr. Philip Hargreaves, ever the professional, kept an eye on everyone, taking mental notes as if he were already preparing his solicitor's report, and Mrs. Agatha Perkins, oblivious to subtle cues, whispered theories to anyone who would listen, none of which were quite accurate, but they served as useful distractions for Miss Marple's keen observations. After a few minutes, Miss Marple excused herself and walked toward the back of the shop, where a small door led to Winthrop's private office. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a neat desk and a few scattered papers. Miss Marple paused, noting the careful arrangement of letters and invoices, the faint aroma of tea from a neglected cup, and the way the sunlight caught a small glass vial on the corner of the desk. It was empty, yet its presence piqued her interest. "May I?" she asked softly, pushing the door slightly wider. Winthrop glanced up, nodding. "Of course, Miss Marple," he said, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She leaned forward to examine the desk, her fingers brushing lightly over the papers. Bills, orders, and letters lay in a precise stack, except for one envelope, which was slightly crumpled and bore no return address. She picked it up carefully, noting a faint smudge of ink on the corner. Oddly, it was unsealed, though there appeared to be a careful attempt to conceal its contents. Miss Marple's instincts stirred. Curious, she murmured, "It seems someone did not wish this letter to be noticed, yet it was, deliberately left in plain sight." At that moment, Captain Belgrave approached, having observed Miss Marple's movements with mild curiosity. "Ah, Miss Marple, are you already uncovering the secrets of Harrington, on the Wold?" he said, attempting a casual tone. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "One does notice certain things when one looks carefully. The world is often more complicated than it seems, Captain." Belgrave raised an eyebrow, but did not press further. He turned his attention to Winthrop. "Henry, are you sure no one has visited the shop recently? No unusual customers? Winthrop shook his head again, but the subtle twitch of his fingers betrayed his unease. I cannot recall anyone unusual," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Meanwhile, Miss Linton approached Miss Marple, clutching a small notebook. "Miss Marple, may I ask you something? I know you are familiar with unusual occurrences. Do you think this incident was truly an accident?" Miss Marple regarded her kindly. "One must gather more evidence before reaching a conclusion, but it is wise to trust one's instincts. Sometimes accidents hide deeper truths." As the villagers chatted, Miss Marple wandered back to the display of rare books. She noticed for the first time a faint smudge on the edge of a shelf. It was subtle, barely perceptible, yet it suggested that someone had recently handled the books in a particular way. She leaned closer, comparing the marks with the positioning of the toppled stack from the morning. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden cough from Mrs. Perkins, who had been lingering near the counter. "I heard," she whispered dramatically, "that Mr. Winthrop was expecting a very special delivery this morning. Perhaps that had something to do with his tumble." Miss Marple's eyes flicked toward Winthrop, noting the slight blanch in his complexion. The shopkeeper's careful composure wavered, ever so slightly, as though the comment had struck a hidden chord. "Special delivery, you say?" Miss Marple asked gently, inclining her head. "You know what it contained, Mrs. Perkins?" "Oh, no," the older lady admitted, fluttering her hand, "but it was to arrive early, and he seemed most eager. Perhaps it was a rare book, or something else." Miss Marple made a silent note of this. Rare deliveries, mysterious letters, subtle injuries, all were pieces of a puzzle that only patience and attention could solve. She returned to the back of the shop, peering once more at the vial. Its emptiness suggested it had been used, yet no one had mentioned it. She tucked this observation away for further consideration. Later in the morning, Miss Marple ventured outside to speak with a few villagers who had remained on the street. She first approached Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor, who was inspecting the frost-covered cobblestones. "Good morning, Mr. Hargreaves," she said pleasantly. "Did you notice anyone entering or leaving the shop unusually early today?" Hargreaves adjusted his spectacles. "Now that you mention it, yes, a man, I did not recognize him, was seen loitering near the lane just before the shop opened. He departed quickly when I glanced his way. Nothing else, I am afraid. Mere coincidence, I suppose." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps a clue hidden in plain sight. Thank you for your observation." She continued down the lane to Miss Linton, who had been chatting nervously with Mrs. Cartwright. "Emily, do you recall seeing anyone behaving oddly?" Miss Marple asked. Miss Linton bit her lip. I thought I saw Captain Belgrave handling some of the rare books before the shop officially opened, but I must be mistaken. He is always so interested in historical volumes." Miss Marple's mind took note of this. Belgrave's earlier restlessness, the smudges on the shelves, the mysterious visitor together, they hinted at motives yet unspoken. By mid-morning, Miss Marple returned to Lady Bantry and Winthrop, who were now seated with cups of tea in the small parlour at the back of the shop. The conversation turned gently to village news, but Miss Marple's mind was already piecing together fragments. The sequence of events, the reactions of the villagers, and the unexplained elements all suggested that this accident might be far more than it appeared. It was then that Miss Marple noticed a subtle detail on the floor, a thin thread of fabric, faint but distinct, trailing toward the shelf where the rare books had been displayed. She picked it up carefully. Its texture was unusual, far finer than the rug that had caused Winthrop's fall. "This," she murmured softly, "is no ordinary accident." Lady Bantry, observing her friend's intense focus, asked gently, "Do you mean to suggest someone meant him harm?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with calm certainty. "I cannot say for certain yet, my dear. But I shall find out. For now, one must watch and listen. The truth is often revealed in the smallest of gestures. And so, as the villagers went about their polite inquiries, and Winthrop tended to the fallen books, Miss Marple settled into her usual role of quiet observer, her mind cataloguing every detail, noting every glance, and preparing for the unravelling of a mystery that promised to be far more intricate than any she had encountered in the serene village of Harrington on the Wold. By midday the quaint calm of Harrington on the Wold had begun to show the faint stirrings of unease. The shop, normally a haven of quiet contemplation, hummed with whispered conjectures and half-concealed glances. Miss Marple, seated near the parlour window with her ever-present notebook and a cup of Lady Bantry's excellent tea, observed the scene with her customary patience. Tea, Miss Marple, Lady Bantry offered, her silver hair glinting in the afternoon sun. The warmth of the tea was comforting, but Miss Marple barely touched the cup, her mind sifting through the morning's observations like the careful turning of delicate pages. "Yes, thank you, my dear, but it seems our little village has become curiously animated." Lady Bantry nodded. "Indeed, I've never seen the shop so full of whispers. Even the regular customers are uneasy, and Henry—" She glanced toward the counter where Winthrop was tidying books nervously. "He seems distracted, though he insists nothing is amiss." Miss Marple's keen gaze followed the shopkeeper. She noticed subtle signs, the way he rubbed the back of his neck, the frequent, almost compulsive glances toward the back shelf, and the way he carefully avoided eye contact with certain villagers. Each gesture, however slight, added to the invisible tapestry of suspicion. The first twist came in the form of a visitor. A young woman, unfamiliar to Harrington, entered the shop quietly. Her clothing suggested she was of some means: a fur-trimmed coat, gloves of soft leather, and a hat with a subtle, stylish flair. She introduced herself as Miss Veronica Fairchild, claiming to be a collector of rare books. "I heard there was a sale today," she said politely, though her eyes scanned the room with a sharp, evaluative gaze. "I have a particular interest in first editions. Perhaps you could show me your collection, Mr. Winthrop." Winthrop's reaction was almost imperceptible, but immediate. His hand shook slightly as he handed her a catalogue. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. It was a small gesture, yet to someone trained in observation it suggested discomfort, even fear. "Very well," Winthrop said, his voice steadier than his hands. "This way, please." While the shopkeeper led Miss Fairchild toward the rare books, Miss Marple took the opportunity to observe the remaining villagers. Captain Belgrave, who had earlier appeared restless, now lingered near the front, apparently inspecting an old map of local estates. Miss Linton hovered nervously near the counter, occasionally glancing toward the rear of the shop. Mrs. Perkins whispered to Mr. Hargreaves, though both paused whenever Miss Marple's gaze settled upon them. It was then that a new clue emerged. Miss Marple noticed a faint smear on the edge of the rare book shelf, a dark, oily substance, subtle but deliberate. She crouched quietly and examined it with her gloved fingers. Noting its composition, she surmised it might have come from the handling of certain bindings, perhaps indicating someone had been tampering with the volumes. Before she could investigate further, a loud gasp echoed from the parlour. The villagers turned to see Miss Fairchild holding an ornate, leather-bound book, her eyes wide in alarm. This is not for sale," she exclaimed, clutching the volume to her chest. Winthrop rushed forward. "Miss Fairchild, you must not touch that." But Miss Marple, ever calm, stepped closer. She noticed a subtle mark on the spine of the book, a tiny scratch, almost like a deliberate identifier. Something about it seemed familiar. "May I see that, Miss Fairchild?" she asked gently. The young woman hesitated, but handed over the book. Miss Marple examined it with meticulous care, noting the subtle smudge that matched the earlier mark on the shelf. Her mind ticked through possibilities. Someone had deliberately sought this book, someone whose motive was far from innocent. Meanwhile, Captain Belgrave approached, trying to distract attention. Miss Marple, he said smoothly, surely this is all a misunderstanding. Perhaps someone misplaced a book. Miss Marple looked at him directly. Misplacement is always a possibility, Captain, but there are patterns even in apparent disorder. Her eyes flicked toward his coat, then to the corner of the counter where the earlier vial had been. The subtle bulge in his pocket, almost invisible, did not escape her notice. At that moment Miss Linton spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. I saw Mr. Hargreaves near the rare books section earlier this morning. He seemed very interested in a particular volume. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. A tangle of motives was beginning to emerge. Each villager's behaviour added a thread to a complex web. Captain Belgrave's restlessness, Miss Linton's nervous glances, Hargreaves' professional curiosity, and now the mysterious Miss Fairchild, whose presence seemed calculated. As the afternoon sun began to wane, Miss Marple decided to focus her attention on the mysterious letter she had discovered in Winthrop's office. It lay unsealed, containing a single sheet with elegant yet hurried handwriting. The words were brief but chilling. Deliver at once. The book must not leave the shop. Failure will have consequences. Miss Marple's mind raced. Whoever had written this note had threatened the shopkeeper, and perhaps intended more than a simple theft. She began to consider motives carefully. Could it be financial gain, personal revenge, or some more arcane obsession with rare literature? The next twist came in the form of another villager. Mrs. Perkins, ever eager to meddle, approached Miss Marple with a flourish. I believe I have uncovered something. I saw Miss Fairchild speaking with Captain Belgrave in whispers near the back. Very suspicious indeed. Miss Marple allowed a faint smile. Indeed, Mrs. Perkins, whispers often reveal much, yet they can also mislead. One must not jump to conclusions. Her caution proved wise, for shortly afterward another mislead presented itself. Captain Belgrave, confronted about his pocket bulge, revealed only a collection of receipts and correspondence, entirely innocent. Miss Fairchild, questioned about her interest in the rare book, explained that she was commissioned by a reputable collector. Even Mr. Hargreaves' presence near the rare books was explained by a routine check for authenticity as part of a civic initiative. Yet despite these innocent explanations, Miss Marple's intuition told her that the core of the mystery remained untouched. She returned to the vial, now considering that it had been deliberately placed, perhaps to suggest poisoning. The faint almond scent lingered in her mind, the signature hint of cyanide. But how, when, and by whom? By late afternoon, Miss Marple had begun subtle interrogations with each villager, asking indirect questions that revealed hidden tensions. She discovered Miss Linton had recently argued with Winthrop over a misfiled donation to the library. Captain Belgrave had debts incurred abroad, a fact he was not eager to disclose. Mr. Hargreaves had a vested interest in a local estate that contained a private library, potentially containing rare volumes. Mrs. Perkins' curiosity, while seemingly innocent, often led to unintended complications. Miss Fairchild's collector's commission was shrouded in secrecy, and she had travelled from London with a sense of urgency. Each revelation, while minor alone, wove together a tapestry of possibilities. Miss Marple understood that while some clues pointed to innocent explanations, others suggested hidden motives and unspoken intentions. As the day drew to a close, a final twist arrived. A small package was found outside the shop, wrapped carefully and addressed to Winthrop. Inside lay another rare book, accompanied by a note. The transaction must be completed by sunset. Delay is dangerous. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The stakes were higher than anyone suspected. What had begun as a simple accident was now a carefully orchestrated drama, involving threats, rare books, and hidden desires. She realized that only patience, observation, and a precise understanding of human nature would allow the truth to surface. As the villagers departed one by one, returning to the warmth of their homes and the familiarity of evening routines, Miss Marple remained seated near the parlour window, her sharp eyes following the fading light across the frost-covered street. She considered the day's revelations, the misleads and red herrings, and the subtle interactions that hinted at deeper secrets. Yes, she murmured softly to herself, there is far more to this than meets the eye. One must watch, one must wait, and above all, one must understand the human heart. And with that, Miss Marple settled into the quiet determination that had seen her through countless mysteries. The threads of intrigue were now clearly visible, and she knew that the coming days in Lady Bantry's old bookshop would reveal a truth both surprising and meticulously concealed. The frost had deepened over Harrington, on the wold, lending the village an almost otherworldly quietness. Evening settled over the cobblestone streets, and the flickering lamplight cast long, slender shadows across ivy-clad cottages. Inside Lady Bantry's old bookshop, the day's disturbances seemed to echo in the dimming light. Miss Marple, seated near the parlour window, contemplated the sequence of events with a mind both calm and unyieldingly sharp. She had spent the better part of the afternoon quietly reviewing the day's observations. The subtle tension in Winthrop's movements, the mysterious letters and packages, the faint almond scent lingering faintly near the rare books, and the various, often contradictory, statements of the villagers. Each seemingly minor detail now formed a latticework of patterns, connecting suspects, motives, and opportunity. Miss Marple, Lady Bantry's soft voice interrupted her thoughts, though the sound of pouring water barely roused her from contemplation. "Thank you, my dear," she replied, though she barely touched the cup. Her mind was elsewhere, weaving the threads of suspicion into a coherent picture. The incidents of the day were not random. They were carefully orchestrated, yet clumsily enough that subtle observation could uncover the truth. Miss Marple began by reviewing the details of the accident itself. A trip over a rug, a toppled stack of books, and Winthrop's pale, trembling hands all seemed, at first glance, inconsequential. Yet the presence of the faint almond scent suggested something far more deliberate, a chemical agent, likely cyanide, introduced but carefully avoided in its effect. The rug may have been intentionally displaced to suggest a fall, and the toppled books were likely a distraction. Her mind turned to the letters and packages. The first letter, unsealed and left conspicuously in Winthrop's office, bore a chilling message: "Deliver at once. The book must not leave the shop. Failure will have consequences." The second package, appearing outside the shop near sunset, reiterated the threat. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, suggesting urgency and anxiety, and the message indicated that the perpetrator was closely monitoring Winthrop's actions. Miss Marple next reviewed the behaviours of the villagers. Captain Belgrave's restlessness, his interest in rare books, and the slight bulge in his coat initially suggested a motive, but it had proven innocuous, merely receipts and correspondence. Miss Linton's nervous glances toward the rear of the shop, Mrs. Perkins's incessant speculation, and Mr. Hargreaves' professional curiosity all painted a picture of distraction, but none held the key. Her eyes settled finally on Miss Veronica Fairchild, the London visitor. Miss Fairchild's sudden appearance, her polished demeanour, and her particular interest in the first edition of the Mysteries of Udolpho now revealed a pattern. She had approached the shop under the guise of a collector, yet her urgency and knowledge suggested familiarity. She had sought out Winthrop's rarest holdings specifically, and her hands-on approach, handling books that were not for sale, revealed both confidence and disregard for social boundaries. Miss Marple recalled the thread of fine fabric she had discovered near the rare books. Its quality was consistent with Miss Fairchild's clothing, though subtle enough to evade casual notice. The matching smudge on the rare book itself further tied her to the scene. As the parlour clock ticked steadily, Miss Marple spoke softly to Lady Bantry, who had been observing her quietly. "I believe I have determined the central player in today's curious events, my dear. It is not Captain Belgrave, nor Mr. Hargreaves, nor anyone from the village. The pattern of urgency, access, and subtle signs all point to Miss Fairchild." Lady Bantry's eyes widened slightly. Veronica Fairchild, but she seemed so composed, so careful. Miss Marple inclined her head. "Exactly. A composed exterior often conceals the most deliberate intent. Observe the small details, her knowledge of the books, her precise movements, the thread and the smudge. She is aware of the value of these items, and willing to manipulate circumstances to achieve her aim." The next step was to determine how far her intentions went. Miss Marple considered the almond scent, the apparent accident, and the threatening letters. It seemed likely that Winthrop had been threatened, perhaps subtly poisoned, or at least put in fear of harm, so that he would comply with Miss Fairchild's demands regarding the rare book. The accident had served as a demonstration of her capability, though Winthrop had narrowly avoided serious injury. Miss Marple rose, moving toward the rear of the shop. "Lady Bantry, I would like to speak privately with Mr. Winthrop for a moment." Once alone, she asked quietly, "Henry, did anyone approach you this morning before the fall?" Winthrop hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, a lady from London. She claimed she was a collector." "She was. Persuasive." Miss Marple gave a small nod. "And did she handle any books in particular?" "Yes, the rare first editions," he admitted. "She seemed almost obsessive." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Exactly so. Now, Henry, did she threaten you in any way?" Winthrop's shoulders stiffened. "Yes, not directly, but there were notes, subtle suggestions, that I must deliver the books or there would be consequences." Miss Marple's intuition had been correct. Miss Fairchild was the architect of the day's events. But the question remained, why? Returning to the parlour, Miss Marple addressed Lady Bantry, who was knitting quietly. "We must be careful, my dear. The young lady's intentions, while clearly improper, must be confronted with tact. Yet the law and propriety must prevail." Miss Marple then gathered the remaining villagers, explaining that she had pieced together the mystery, but without revealing the culprit outright. Instead, she allowed small clues to emerge in conversation, guiding observation toward Miss Fairchild. A final, decisive clue came when Miss Marple examined the rare book itself. She noticed a slight indentation on the inside cover, an old, almost imperceptible mark where a thin compartment might exist. Within it lay a tiny folded note: "Do not delay. The collector expects immediate delivery. Failure is costly." Miss Marple held it delicately. "This confirms our suspicions. The intent was to coerce Mr. Winthrop, using both subtle intimidation and a display of knowledge. The aim was the acquisition of rare items, perhaps for profit, perhaps for some personal obsession, but the threads of evidence, notes, behaviour, fabric, smudges, and timing leave no doubt as to the person responsible." She turned to Lady Bantry. "The next step is simple. Observation, gentle questioning, and a small test will reveal the truth to all present without causing scandal." As dusk fell, Miss Marple instructed Winthrop to arrange the rare books for a final inspection, then asked Miss Fairchild to assist. Subtle questioning, a slight misdirection, and careful observation of reactions all revealed her anxiety, her over-prepared responses, and her intricate knowledge of the notes and packages. By the end, Miss Marple's deduction was clear and incontrovertible. Miss Veronica Fairchild had orchestrated the morning's events to obtain the rare books by intimidation and subtle threat. The evening air in Harrington on the Wold was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine from nearby cottages. Inside Lady Bantry's old bookshop, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Miss Marple, calm and composed as ever, had requested that all involved remain in the parlour while she prepared to reveal her findings. The villagers, though curious, felt an undercurrent of unease, sensing that the day's mystery was about to reach its conclusion. "Thank you all for remaining," Miss Marple began, her tone gentle yet firm. "What has transpired today may appear confusing, even alarming, but as always, the truth is simpler than it seems once one examines the facts closely." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The room was silent, save for the soft ticking of the parlour clock and the distant call of a nightingale outside. "First, let us consider the events themselves. This morning, Mr. Winthrop experienced what appeared to be an accidental fall over a rug. Books toppled in the rear of the shop, and a faint almond scent lingered in the air, a detail that is easily overlooked, but significant to those who know signs." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the group, resting momentarily on each face before continuing. The rug, while ordinary in appearance, had been deliberately displaced. The toppled books were a calculated distraction, and the faint scent of almonds suggests that some form of chemical, cyanide perhaps, was involved, though used carefully to intimidate rather than harm. Whispers rippled among the villagers. Captain Belgrave's brow furrowed. Miss Linton's fingers tightened around her gloves. Mrs. Perkins leaned forward eagerly, as if ready to gasp aloud at the revelation. "Now," Miss Marple continued, "we must ask, who had the knowledge, opportunity, and motive to orchestrate such a scheme? The list of suspects, while seemingly long, quickly narrows when we examine their actions and intentions throughout the day." She recounted the subtle clues she had observed, the mysterious letter left in Mr. Winthrop's office, the threatening package delivered at sunset, the faint thread found near the rare books, and the smudge on the first edition of the Mysteries of Udolpho. Each piece, she explained, pointed to one individual, someone who had knowledge of rare books, had carefully planned the timing, and had sought to manipulate the shopkeeper into compliance. Miss Marple's gaze finally settled on Miss Veronica Fairchild, who had remained composed throughout, though a faint flicker of unease betrayed her calm. "Miss Fairchild," Miss Marple said softly, "it is clear that you orchestrated the events of this morning. Your knowledge of the rare books, your arrival from London, and your careful handling of both letters and packages all indicate your involvement." The young woman's eyes widened slightly, but she did not deny the accusation. Miss Marple continued, detailing the evidence with precision, yet with a tone that was firm without being harsh. "You arrived at Harrington, on the Wold, under the guise of a collector. Your goal was to acquire a particular first edition, The Mysteries of Udolpho, and you attempted to compel Mr. Winthrop to comply through intimidation. The fallen rug, the toppled books, and the faint almond scent were all part of your carefully orchestrated display. The letters and packages were designed to create urgency and fear, ensuring that Mr. Winthrop would act according to your wishes." Miss Fairchild's hands trembled slightly, and she swallowed before speaking. I didn't mean to frighten him," she stammered. "I only wanted the book for a private collector. I never intended to harm anyone." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Intent can often be the difference between mischief and crime. While no physical harm came to Mr. Winthrop, the actions you took were deliberate and calculated. The fear you instilled, and the potential danger from the chemical you used, could have had severe consequences." Lady Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, added with quiet dignity, "Miss Fairchild, perhaps you can understand that in Harrington, on the Wold, we value integrity and honesty. Coercion is not tolerated here, even in the pursuit of rare books." Captain Belgrave, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I did not realize the situation was so serious. I thought perhaps it was mere mischief or a misunderstanding." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "And that is precisely why careful observation matters. It is easy to be misled by appearances, but once the threads are woven together, a clear picture emerges." She then addressed the villagers collectively. "I hope this serves as a reminder that vigilance, attention, and understanding human nature are essential. The smallest details often reveal the truth, even when appearances suggest otherwise." Turning back to Miss Fairchild, Miss Marple added, "Now that the facts are clear, I trust you will cooperate with Mr. Winthrop and the authorities in resolving this matter appropriately." Miss Fairchild nodded, her composure returning in the face of reasoned explanation. "Yes, of course. I see now that my actions were misguided, and I will make amends." At that moment, Mr. Winthrop, who had been quietly listening, spoke with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Your insight has prevented what could have been a far more serious incident. I am truly grateful." Miss Marple inclined her head modestly. "It is always a pleasure to assist, and it is a reminder that even in the most serene villages, human nature can introduce complications. Observation, patience, and understanding often illuminate what is hidden in plain sight." The villagers, now reassured, began to relax. Captain Belgrave offered a sheepish smile, Miss Linton straightened her posture with relief, and Mrs. Perkins, though disappointed at the lack of scandal, nodded in acceptance. The tension that had pervaded the shop all day began to dissolve, replaced by the warmth of restored trust and community. Lady Bantry rose, smoothing her skirts. "Well, I think that calls for tea, doesn't it? Perhaps a small celebration that order has been restored." Miss Marple smiled, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. "Indeed, my dear, after all, even the most intricate mysteries can be unravelled with patience and care." As they gathered around the table, the aroma of fresh scones and tea filled the parlour, mingling with the faint scent of ink and old paper. Outside, the frost sparkled under the pale moonlight, and the village of Harrington on the Wold once again exuded its tranquil charm. Before the evening ended, Miss Marple made a final, reflective observation to Lady Bantry. "You see, my dear, the heart of a mystery is not always in the grand gestures or dramatic events. Often it is the small, overlooked details, the glances, the misplaced objects, the subtle reactions, that reveal the truth. One must simply watch and listen carefully. Human nature seldom conceals as well as we imagine." Lady Bantry nodded, a thoughtful smile on her face. "Indeed, Jane, you have an uncanny gift for seeing what others do not." Miss Marple sipped her tea, eyes twinkling. "It is a gift that requires patience, observation, and a steady heart. But most importantly, one must remember that people are rarely wholly good or wholly bad. Even those who err often do so from desire, curiosity, or misguided ambition. Understanding that is as important as solving the puzzle itself." As the villagers took their leave, exchanging polite goodbyes and expressing gratitude, Miss Marple felt the familiar satisfaction that came with a mystery resolved. The village would sleep peacefully tonight, unaware of how close it had come to discord, yet assured in the knowledge that reason, observation, and gentle intervention had restored balance. Lady Bantry escorted Miss Marple to the door as the last visitor departed. "I cannot thank you enough, Jane. Your presence has turned a troubling morning into a day of clarity and reassurance." Miss Marple smiled warmly. "The pleasure is mine, my dear, and remember, the world may always contain mysteries, but with patience, observation, and a clear mind, even the most tangled threads can be untangled." The frost sparkled on the cobblestones as they stepped out into the cool evening air. The shop's warm light glowed behind them, casting a welcoming aura into the village square. Harrington on the Wold would awaken to another peaceful morning, the memory of the day's disturbances already beginning to fade into the comforting rhythm of village life. And so Lady Bantry's old bookshop returned to its customary quiet, its shelves lined with books, its doors open to those who loved literature, and its secrets safely revealed by the keen mind of Miss Jane Marple, who once again had restored order, justice, and calm to a community that treasured both.